Hey, folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. This is Mind Your Banners for Wednesday, December 17th, 2025. With me, as always, is noted Tommy Norris enthusiast Mike Niziolek, as you can see there in his title. There is no bigger fan of the Billy Bob Thornton character brought to life in Landman than Mike Niziolek. This will probably be the last Mind Your Banners, Mike, before Christmas, would be my guess. There's not a heck of a lot else going on. There's a couple of basketball games that Indiana should probably win comfortably. There will be one, I think, Zoom with Kurt Spagnetti, but that's going to be the extent of pre-Christmas football sort of availability. Frankly, at this point, it actually seems, I called this the calm before the storm, but it does feel a little bit like this. The last couple of months have kind of been fast and furious, and there is a little bit of a pause here before, obviously, things take off at a sprint before the playoff.
Yeah, well, they'll get to know their opponent. What is Alabama, Oklahoma on the 19th?
Yeah, it's the Friday night game.
So obviously that'll kind of, I think,
you can tell where the hierarchy of the games, because Alabama, Oklahoma gets its own night, and then A&M, Miami is a noon kickoff, but that means it doesn't compete with NFL games. And then the two G5 games compete directly with the NFL. I saw someone on Twitter saying, oh, well, college football is a much more entertaining product anyway. And I said, well, I might agree with you to a certain extent on that, but I don't think the ratings are going to. So Indiana will have a little bit. We're talking 12 hours of extra advance notice of who they will face in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, but that kicks off, I think, when Chris Ignatius talked about that kind of sort of is the change, right? The marker that once they get an opponent, they'll kind of dive in and get really back to work. They're not doing like full scouts of both teams, so they're kind of waiting for that moment as well. My phone's on. I don't know where it is. So we'll see. I think it'll be interesting to see what opponent they get. I think Alabama, obviously, tons of built-in storylines. Oklahoma's got that great defense, but obviously have a couple more days here until we find out who will meet them in the Rose Bowl.
Who would you, if you're Indiana, who would you want, do you think, at this point?
I don't know. I think both teams are flawed in certain ways. I think Alabama's sort of and I think we talked about this on the last one. They're not playing their best football. Maybe having a little break here helps them kind of refocus. But at the same time, I think Oklahoma's offense obviously might be the weakest sort of unit of the two teams, in terms of defense, offense. And so, there's probably, if you can get to 21 points or 20 points, you probably win that game. With the defense Indiana brings to the table. So I think it's, I don't know necessarily that there's like a team that you're scared of in this moment for Indiana or you're worried about. And the flip side for Oklahoma, maybe the best unit out of that group is the defense, right? So it's an interesting juxtaposition there. But if you maybe think that which team has the most holes right now, maybe it's Alabama just based on the way they're playing, but I don't know.
Yeah, if you go back and look at that, and I tend to agree with you. And there's one reason why in particular. If you go back and look at that Oklahoma-Alabama game, Oklahoma won in Tuscaloosa on November 15th, so a month and 2 days ago. Alabama outgained Oklahoma 406 to 212 in that game. They more than doubled Oklahoma. In fact, they about 2.5 times more passing yards. They averaged more yards per play. They had almost twice as many first downs. They ran 24 more plays, which is like a huge number. But I think Oklahoma had a pick 6 in that game. And this is probably the game, other than maybe the SEC championship game, that when you do sort of say it seems like Alabama's not necessarily been at its best lately, maybe the game that people are referring to. I would go with Oklahoma because I think what you're trying to say there, and I agree with, is the path to beating Oklahoma is a lot more linear, which is just Oklahoma is really going to struggle. Like if you look at what Oklahoma's done against anybody with a good defense this season, they only put up 6 on Texas. They only put up 17 on Missouri. They only put up 17 on LSU. like if you can get to, like you said, 21, 24, 28 points, history, I mean, just of this season tells us that's going to be a hard number for Oklahoma to match, unless, of course, you give them, they do kind of feast on turnovers. I think I believe they had a pick six or some kind of turnover for a touchdown in a game they won at Tennessee earlier this year as well. Turnovers are a little bit random. Good defenses tend to force them, but they're, they aren't necessarily just something that can be baked into a game plan. Whereas I suspect that if Alabama went and won this game on Friday night, it would take the kind of effort that would leave Alabama coming out of it feeling very confident in itself, if that makes sense. That it would take a sort of effort that would maybe suggest to us that some of that sort of late season slump we saw in Alabama did get fixed between the SEC championship game and the first round of the playoff. And then you start to get into Alabama's got the better quarterback. Alabama's got the better skill players. Alabama is going to have athletes on both sides of the ball. And Alabama is going to be in a position where if they do come into that game confident, maybe a little healthier, maybe in some better rhythm, they can make some plays on you. And suddenly, they're stressing you in a way I'm just not sure Oklahoma can, because I think Indiana can make Oklahoma more one-dimensional between offense and defense. When I do my schedule predictions at the beginning of the year, I know I've mentioned this to you. One of the things I think is just I ask this question of like, who has a better coach, who has the better quarterback, who has home field advantage. If you're asking me for Oklahoma, I think the answer to the first two is Indiana, and the answer to the third is null and void because it's a neutral site game. If you're asking me with Alabama, I probably still lean Indiana, but I think the Kalen DeBoer, Ty Simpson sort of axis probably stacks up better with the Kurt Signetti, Fernando Mendoza matchup. And I just think that that Alabama is a team that is more sort of multifaceted in how dangerous it can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think what scares you about Oklahoma, I mean, when you look at sacks, Oklahoma's tied for first in the country, 41. Indiana's not far behind. They have 39. And then tackles for loss, Oklahoma first, 115. Indiana second, 112. They create havoc like no team Indiana has seen this season. And that offensive line we've talked about, sort of, if you're talking about question marks for Indiana, is probably at the top of the list. Who will it be? What does that group look like now? And what is the strongest starting five there at this point? Do you have a clear answer? And when we've seen them struggle, and it's like a line I keep repeating. It's like it's when teams get pressure, and Alabama's not going to get the kind of pressure Oklahoma does. That's, I think, very clear. And so, that is something to be mindful of when, I think the source of Indiana's struggles on offense is when they allow pressure, and Oklahoma has been a team that's not, no team has slowed Oklahoma down. Their front seven, it's just been, I think you mentioned it's kind of up there with, best in the country. They've had 4 or more sacks in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games this season. I mean, that's significant, right? I mean, that's huge.
And our Mason Thomas is back. They're a really good defensive end. He's going to play this weekend, is my understanding, against Alabama. So like that, that's.
They had, what's pretty incredible. 1, 2, 3. They had a game of 6 straight games where they had double-digit tackles for loss. So I mean, and the part of it, when Indiana is one-dimensional with the run game, it tends to struggle a little more, this season. And so I just think that, that's kind of, I think, what's scary from an Indiana perspective about Oklahoma. And it's been kind of the whole season for Oklahoma. Their opponents obviously have not fared well against that front seven. That's what kind of got them to the playoffs. I mean, carried them literally because they don't have an offense, or not a very good one. And so I think that does have to be, you have to be worried about that.
Yeah. It kind of goes, I guess maybe the best way to think about it is it kind of goes both ways. That on the one hand, Oklahoma is probably the easier opponent to pigeonhole. And on the other hand, Oklahoma probably has the unit that you would most fear, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Like that on, you would be able, in one respect, to say,
And that might be against Indiana's greatest weakness as well. So it's not a group, and like we said, it's relative. They might be the Joe Moore Award winner, ironically, but still, it's the unit that, I don't know, gives you pause, just because, like I said, I can't say what the starting five will be.
I think
at the Rose Bowl.
The one thing I would mitigate a little bit, and I pulled up Parker Fleming's projections on what the lines would be on these two games. The one thing I would mitigate a little bit with Oklahoma, and some of this is probably our Mason Thomas related. So if he's healthy, then then that changes the equation. There is a pronounced difference in their defensive performance depending on who they're playing. So, they aren't horrible defensively against Texas, but they give up 300 yards. They lose the game by 17. A lot of that is defined by the fact that Mateer's clearly not healthy, because he suffered, what was it, like a thumb injury or a hand injury, and he had to have surgery, and he came back, and he clearly wasn't sharp. But if you look at 4 of their last 5 games, Ole Miss went for 34 points, 315 passing yards, 431 total yards. Tennessee went for 27 points, 393 passing yards, 456 total yards. Alabama went for 326 through the air, 406 overall. Again, we've talked about how Alabama really kind of left a lot of opportunities on the field in that game. Like their best, and listen, we can say this a little bit too about Indiana, but I would argue Indiana's been better against good teams defensively than Oklahoma has. Like, they're good against Michigan, but that's Bryce Underwood's second career start and his first one away from home. They're good against an Auburn team that, frankly winds up being so bad offensively they fire their head coach. I'm not saying they're stat padding, but like when they have faced better offenses this season, they have not necessarily been as dominant, at least and this is where the turnover piece comes in, because they are very capable of forcing those. But they have not necessarily been as dominant when they have faced teams that you would say have offenses that are at the level their defense is. And I think your point is very valid about where Indiana is in its offensive line. I just think the flip side to that is I look at Oklahoma and there is a significant departure. There's a significant gap between Oklahoma against South Carolina, Auburn, Temple, Illinois State, Kent State, LSU, teams that are just bad offensively or are just going to be overmatched talent-wise, and Oklahoma against teams that are at a playoff or at least playoff-adjacent level at some point offensively this season.
Well, a couple things. It's not turnovers because they've only forced 13 and they have a negative turnover margin.
Yeah, but they have. Where are they in points off turnovers or touch? Like they've had some very timely. I think they had pick sixes in both the Tennessee game and the Alabama game that helped turn those games around. Is my point.
I got you. I can't per game. They've only forced multiple turnovers in 3 games. What it has been though, in versus Indiana, more of a bend don't break defense. Because when you look at their red zone opportunities, Indiana's top of the country has only allowed 22 trips inside the red zone. Oklahoma's allowed only 28, only allowed 22 touchdowns, or 22 scores, sorry, and 11 touchdowns inside the red zone. So, I mean, what you're talking about is a team, even when they've allowed those yardage in those bigger games against better offenses, once they get inside the 25, inside the 20, teams that are not scoring very frequently, and they're not scoring very frequently against Oklahoma in general. I think had it up. Either way, you still at the top of the country in kind of touchdowns allowed total. So I think it's more of a, against mediocre or average offenses, they're just shutting them down. But against good offenses, yes, offenses are getting some yardage against them, but still having a hard time scoring or getting touchdowns. And so, and we've seen Indiana's red zone offense be a little uneven this season, without, I think one of the differences that they never quite closed the gap on was between last year with Justin Ellison and Tyson Lawton versus this year's group is having that consistent ability to punch it in from inside the 5, right? We've seen it kind of time and time again against really good teams. kind of come back, because it started in week one, then it kind of went away, and then it came back. And so I think that would be a concern. That would be a concern for me. If you're going up against Oklahoma, if you get 4 trips inside the 20 or 3 trips inside the 20, how many touchdowns are you coming away with? Because it's only one. This might be a game. And so I don't know if Alabama has the kind of defense to slow Indiana down just the way Oklahoma is.
It's worth pointing out, like, Indiana's still really good in the red zone this year. They're 15th in touchdown percentage. They're 2nd in total touchdowns. They're 3rd in total red zone scores. They're 4th in total red zone attempts. It's just that last year, like, they were so otherworldly efficient. Like, I think I even saw a stat that Fernando Mendoza got like 22 touchdown passes and no interceptions in the red zone this season. It's just that last year they, like, one of their superpowers was that they were just unbelievably efficient in the red zone. Like, once they got there, you didn't keep them out of the end zone. Like, I mean, to use last year's comparison, last year they were 2nd in the country behind only Navy, which is obviously a very specific kind of offense, averaging 79.7% of red zone trips ending in touchdowns, not just scores, but touchdowns. They had 69 attempts, 64 scores, and 55 touchdowns. This season, the number is still really good. They have lost their touchdown percentage all of a sudden. They're a little further down, I think, in touchdown percentage. But
72%.
I'm sorry, I went to 2023, not 2025. That's my fault. They are 15th this season, 72.3% in touchdown percentage, 65 attempts, 59 scores, 47 touchdowns. So they have to settle a little bit more.
But it's been in specific games because, like, yes, to your point, they're still really good. But like the 8 of 9 against Indiana State overshadows some, and 7 of 7 against Kennesaw State. Look, Old Dominion obviously was the huge disaster. 2 touchdowns on 7 trips inside the red zone. Drove Kurt Cignetti crazy. Michigan State, 1 touchdown on 3 trips inside the red zone. And then Ohio State, obviously, 1 touchdown in 4 trips. Like, against good team, Michigan State couldn't make them pay. But in Ohio, and the Old Dominion game was much closer because of that. But against Ohio State, you almost lose that game because if you come up with 1 more touchdown inside the 25 in that game's not a game. I mean, you're comfortable. You have a comfortable 2-possession lead almost throughout that entire game. And so
I don't think that's totally unfair. I think it's fair to point out back in the other direction that against Penn State, Oregon, Iowa, and Illinois, they took 16 red zone trips and they scored on all 16 of them.
Right, but I'm saying when they've struggled, those things have come to the forefront. Yeah. And so against a team that's their strength, like Oklahoma, that has to be a concern. I'm not saying, this is a team that's really struggled throughout the season. No, but when they've struggled, you've seen kind of common themes come up, and one of them has been, we get inside the 20, we are just offense kind of, whether it's play calling, whether it's just not being able to run the ball, those things have popped up, and those have been in games. Michigan State was a closer game, for much of it, through especially the first half because of that. And Old Dominion obviously too. So I just think that when you say like Oklahoma, one of the reasons where they are is because of their red zone defense. That would worry me from an Indiana perspective.
Who says
two properties points? Like, look, we're talking about
it's kind of nitpicking, but listen, like, we're down to the 12 best teams in the country. Like, that's like nitpicking is what's going to win and lose these games. I mentioned this a minute ago, just the projections from Parker Fleming. If you look at Oklahoma versus Indiana on a neutral field, he's got Indiana at 26.5 points and Oklahoma at 16.1. He gives Indiana a 68.4% chance of victory. Alabama, slightly tighter. Indiana 28.8 points. Alabama 19.9. Indiana with a 65.9% chance of victory. If you're looking for where, maybe like where these games are won, at least in the stats, Indiana's a lot better in early downs offensively than Alabama is. Oklahoma's offensive profile is just a mess. I think it's pretty obvious where the gap is there. Like, Oklahoma just, again, you want to go back to like what Oklahoma has done defensively this season. I would also point at what Oklahoma has not done offensively. Like, they have really struggled consistently to get more than even 21 to 24 points out of their offense. There have been some games that there have been some games where they have been very sort of, again, opportunistic in terms of like maybe a turnover that sets up a short field, or the memorable one is the pick six against Alabama and Tuscaloosa. But like their offense has just been even once Mateer's gotten healthy, and I don't know if maybe you feel like with some time, Ben Arbuckle, their offensive coordinator, can scheme some things up, but he's probably going to have to show that in the Alabama game. You would think if he's got it. Their offense is just not very good at all.
Well, ironically, Hoop asked for their red zone efficiency numbers. Oklahoma's first in scores. They've had 32 trips inside the red zone and come up with 32 scores, 100%. So,
yeah,
but
they have less than half of the trips that Indiana does for like that's why you always.
The formula is very clear for them, though. I mean, they've got to hold teams less than 25 points, 20 points, and then fight it out. But that can be a scary opponent because, like, look, if they're firing on all cylinders defensively, and you get in that kind of dogfight, it could come down to a field goal at the end, and that's not where you want to be. I still think Indiana, like you said, double-digit favorite will be. They'll be a double-digit favorite in both of these games, whoever their opponent is, and I still will likely pick Indiana. But I'm just saying, what's the path to being upset, and that's kind of what we're talking about. And I think you look at these things, no matter like outside the group of 5 opponents. Like that's what all these games are going to be. You're playing the best teams in the country, like on a neutral field, and so it's going to be most of the time one on the margins. And yes, there's going to be blowouts from time to time, and is Indiana capable of that because of the offense they bring and because of the defense they bring? Sure, but we saw it against Ohio State. It was a dogfight, and I think you think that that's more likely when both teams are healthy. Those are going to be the kind of games you find in the playoffs, or at least that's for me.
Oh, well, and I think there is, and I'm scrolling over to Alabama here just to kind of like underscore. I mean, they have really struggled. I mean, they've only topped 400 yards of total offense once against an FBS opponent since the Vanderbilt win on October 4th. There was a time when we were talking about Ty Simpson as a Heisman Trophy candidate. And really, there was a time we were talking about Ty Simpson as the Heisman Trophy front runner. And I don't know if there's been a suggestion that maybe he's not super healthy. Because of family ties, I watched a decent amount of that Iron Bowl. Auburn is pretty good defensively, but he did not look good in that game. And that was a game that obviously it felt like Alabama really had to win. Again, Oklahoma is the only game Alabama has broken either 300 yards passing or 400 yards of total offense since Vanderbilt in week 5, other than Eastern Illinois, which is obviously not relevant to our issues here. I think, I do wonder if there is a little bit, though, of just, Hoop says Alabama's got nothing but 5 stars. He said that earlier. I do think there's also just that element of you fear the idea of what Alabama can be. That I guess the way that I'm trying to put it into words. Beating Oklahoma is the more straightforward task. Now, it might be harder in some ways because Oklahoma has a unit that is defined as like really, really top shelf, top of the sport. Their defense is as good as any in the country, et cetera. But you sort of know, like the game plan for beating Oklahoma is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Whereas I think with Alabama that fear of the unknown of what if something was wrong with Ty Simpson and they get it right? What if the all the 5 stars that Hoop is talking about just show up to play that day? The fear of what Alabama in theory can be, I think is why people blanch at that. Now, listen, they got smothered by Georgia. I mean, like and I watched some of that game as well, because we were kind of just in some downtime trying to figure out between the Louisville game and the Ohio State game. I mean, they could not do anything. They rushed for -3 yards. Georgia won 28-7. It felt like 58-7. I mean, it genuinely did. And I know that that was a really big game for Georgia. Alabama has kind of been an albatross for Kirby Smart, since he got to Athens. But it is, I think it's more the fear of what sort of in your mind Alabama can be, if that makes sense.
But I don't know that
Caleb here saying I've seen people suggesting Simpson has a back injury. I've not seen that. I would say if he has a back injury, there's no chance it gets healed in like 3 weeks. But
I just feel like, it's like I go back to those Bears teams and the Bears team that kind of carried Rex Grossman to the Super Bowl. Like, you knew what the formula was. Like, every opponent came in there knowing, like, this offense is terrible. Just got to beat this defense. But when there's no variance in the performance most of the time with the defense, which was what we've seen from Oklahoma, and we've seen what good coaching looks like with Cignetti and both sides of their ball. And, like, if that – like I said, that scares me more than, look, yeah, Alabama has the talent to reach a certain level that I don't think they've very often played at this season. Maybe once, maybe in the first Georgia game. But outside of that, like, when's the last time that they reached that? Hasn't been recently, obviously. And where that there's been very little, because even the game Oklahoma lost to Texas, like Texas had 23 points. It wasn't like things fell apart defensively. And so it just to me, that consistency on that side of the ball would scare me more than sort of the upside Alabama has, which I don't think they've really reached at a sort of a sustained rate or recently to sort of say, like, yeah, that's going to come back after, 13 weeks and when you're not healthy and when you're going to be playing a hard game against Oklahoma. Like, it's like you said, like, you're coming out of that game, Indiana's off a bye, whereas Alabama is going to have to expend all this energy to win. I don't know. To me, the defense scares me a little more than anything Alabama has shown of late.
Just to put a bow on one thing really quickly, R. Mason Thomas had a 71-yard fumble recovery for a touchdown in the Tennessee game. So there was the pick six against Alabama. There was also a defensive touchdown against it. Now, it was early in the game, but the point is Oklahoma's defense is not just smothering. They have proven an ability to make sort of game-changing plays as well. I think there is also the Indiana side of this, and I think there was a pronounced mood shift. I thought Monday during Fernando Mendoza's sort of post Heisman press conference. You were in New York, you saw and documented so well, all of these sorts of really, moments that I think will become iconic in IU fans' memories. Mendoza's win, his speech, his teammates there for him, his family there with him, all those sorts of things. It just strikes me that if anything, this might be Curt Cignetti's most difficult opponent at this point. And he said he was joking when he was up on the stage on Lucas Oil Field or Lucas Oil Stadium Field, that he had 3.5 weeks to humble his team. But how many times does he say, my number one job is to root out complacency? It's been a distracting couple of weeks, and Indiana is, I think, back to work this week in terms of like really sort of getting back into the football flow and preparation and everything. But I think I'm fascinated to see how Curt Cignetti approaches just to what extent does he feel like he needs to try and get his team's attention again, because he's talked about this before too, that sometimes if you overplay this kind of stuff, it can wind up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy that you can wind up kind of putting it in guys' heads that this is a problem, and then it just sort of consumes them. But I think, just kind of like moving on, getting back to football, I think is going to be an important sort of a phase of this that Indiana really needs to master, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a little overblown, just because like they've met every moment like that's been over the last 2 years, like not overlooking weaker opponents to me, and never sort of falling down that trap game hole. It's like as Cignetti kind of puts it, it's just like they've shown an ability to move on and ignore sort of that kind of component of it. I think that these moments are, it was a nice sort of celebration in terms of the Big Ten title game and the Heisman, sort of a chance to sort of celebrate what they've accomplished over the last, not just year, but 2 years. But I think they'll move on pretty quickly. And this was during downtime, so I mean, like they weren't missing anything. This wasn't like at the cost of something else. Like I think it would have been interesting if they were playing a first round game, how this would have looked, because the Heisman ceremony, when they kind of announce like the finalists, they say like some teams might have practice and some teams might not be able. Some finalists might not be able to make like Friday things. Like, would Signetti have held everybody back? And I think he would have. And so I think just everything lined up to allow them to take in this moment for what it was, historic and everything. But I don't think it comes at the cost of being able to focus on the team, because they still got a ton of time left and they don't even know their opponent yet. So it's like, I still think that they're going to be able to transition just fine. And I'm sure he'll have a fun quote or two when they get back to work about doing that. But I still think he's been, he's shown Signetti the ability to hit all the right buttons when it comes to this kind of stuff. So there's no reason to doubt him now. I'm saying you have 2 years of proof that he's done it. What would change? And because Mendoza's the type of player that's not going to be. I mean, he was already talking about getting antsy about wanting to prep, at the Heisman ceremony. So it's not like he's going to indulge or anything like that.
I think the only, and I broadly agree, the only pushback I would give is that even Curt Signetti, we are now in uncharted territory even for him. This is a level that even his teams previously have not achieved at. Someone asked about, I'll scroll back and figure out who it was. Pecan Pies asked what the defensive line looks like without Daly, and I think it's worth just kind of discussing. I know you and I have had these conversations. I don't think there's one answer. Like, I don't think it's just like Daniel and Ndukwe come on down and that's it. I know you've suggested maybe they move to more odd fronts, which was something that we certainly saw a lot from them toward the end of last season. I have wondered if in certain situations they might kick a player like Mario Landino, who played on the edge last year, outside. I certainly think getting Mikhail Kamara healthier, fitter, sharper, whatever, because there's kind of been this suggestion that he's been playing with an injury, but I think Curt Signetti is, stop me if you think I'm wrong, but I think he's made it clear he doesn't think it's all the injury that's maybe not been that's maybe been holding Mikhail Kamara back at times this season. I think there are a few different answers to this, and the question is basically which ones does Bryant Haynes think are the best ones, and the ones that maybe we see the most for Oklahoma and moving forward. Well, Oklahoma, Alabama, and moving forward.
Yeah, and I don't know Alabama's offensive scheme very well, or Oklahoma's, like what they do. Like the reason we saw a lot of 4-3 looks with Ohio State is when a team runs 12 personnel with 2 tight ends. Indiana likes to have 3 linebackers on the field. So some of what Bryant Haynes kind of cooks up will be dependent on what both Oklahoma and Alabama do. I still think the most straightforward thing is to just, Ndukwe gets sort of the most snaps. And then if he limits you in which on that side in terms of production, you just, Bryant Haynes has shown he can blitz and bring a lot of pressure that way if he wants to. He's kind of held back in that way this year, I think, and let kind of the front 4 or 4 guys get home a lot of the time. But he's can try it that way, and some of the schemes and disguises and things that they do, stunts. Especially with Kamara, who's very comfortable with that, and the defensive tackles. Tucker obviously has been in the system for a very long time, and so they're comfortable that way. So I think you could scheme up pressure to make up for maybe Ndukwe not being sort of as productive as Stephen Daly without sort of taking him off the field. Because I think you move Landino, you try to have all these different moving pieces, then it becomes just more question marks. So for me, it's just like the most straightforward way is just give him the snaps and try to, if he can't kind of get the pressure you want, do all the stuff that you do that's worked throughout the season that way. And I think that's maybe the easiest thing. But I think a lot of it will depend on what the other team looks like, what their formations they use, and they sort of adapt each week to week. I mean, that's why he's won the AFCA Assistant Coach of the Year award, and is up for a Broyles finalist for a second straight season. And
I think
we should mention this is a good place. Brian Haynes did sign an extension. A
yes.
huge. I mean, you want to talk about like a foundation of this success is also what he's done on the defensive side of the ball. New 3-year deal hits that $3 million mark, which you kind of talked about is sort of amazing because when you were here, you can maybe talk to that
Yeah,
about.
like before people ask, no, there is no formal plan for Bryant Haynes to be named coach in waiting. Like I've gotten that question like 3 or 4 times, and um, I am not going to sit here and tell you Brian Haynes will never be the head coach in Indiana. Like that's a perfectly plausible future, I suppose, especially when you have a head coach who will be 65 at the start of next season. Curt Cignetti's made it clear he has, in his mind, plenty of gas left in the tank. I don't think Scott Dolson or Curt Cignetti, and I don't want to speak for Brian Haynes. We don't know him too well. Coordinators don't speak to us very often at all. But my suspicion is I don't think even Brian Haynes would want an arrangement like that. And by the way, like it has not worked that well. Like if you think about it's fine to have somebody who's a natural successor, but I think there is a problem when you start labeling people coach in waiting. I mean, the one really successful one was Jimbo Fisher, and that you had to drive a Hall of Fame coach, maybe the best in college football history, out in under really ugly circumstances for that to work. And then, Fisher delivers you a national championship and within like 5 years, he's at Texas A&M, and within 10 years he's out of coaching. So I don't know that, I would look at that. I don't know that I would hold that one up and be like, see, it can work. But I think it is very relevant to your point that Indiana is once again showing like there is no number that it cannot be competitive with in staffing and assistant coaches' salaries. I think it's important, that when you have a coordinator as good as Haynes, who is willing again and again to say, this is the right place for me, this is the right head coach to work for. I think that speaks really well to transfers, to players. Like we talk so much about transfers in high school recruits. I think it speaks well to retaining the players you have.
What's funny is that these are now numbers that eliminates a coach wanting to have to. I mean, he can obviously he can absolutely, but I mean, think about like the group of 5. JMU's new coach Billy Napier. Like Haynes is making like 3 times his salary now. And so like you make it very hard for him, like outside of Power 4 head coaching opportunities, because you're not going to move laterally now, obviously. When you're sort of at the highest point of the pay scale, you really do. There is some protection there, and you make coaches have to think like if you want to go into head coaching, like a lot of these jobs is going to be a significant pay cut. I mean, Indiana has stepped up to the point where they make it so it has to be like a perfect opportunity and a really good job to make that jump. And that's what Curt Cignetti said he wants, because he wants to reward these people. That loyalty is important, commitment's important, and that's what they've shown in Indiana. Is just, I think you should share that. I think you wrote about it on Saturday night, Sunday morning about Tom Allen having to pay to make a change, right? Or what was that story?
Well, yeah, no, I didn't write about it, but I mean, people will remember when Tom Allen wanted to make a change at coordinator and remove Nick Sheridan after the 2021 season. He had to take a pay cut. Now that was in part because of sort of post-COVID finances too. Like that was, that was the department had gone through like furloughs and layoffs and job eliminations, and there was sort of this feeling of like, okay, if we're going to pay this 6-figure buyout to, for an offensive coordinator who I think had just gotten a new contract, if I remember correctly, there was a feeling like, okay, the head coach is going to need to help subsidize some of this. But yeah, I mean, it is a different.
Just the juxtaposition of where they're at. I mean, what they're willing to commit, and now. First $2 million guy, $3 million guy, just an incredible sort of turnaround. And that's the commitment that they've obviously made to success here.
Okay, 2 things. I want to address what Pecan asked here. The one thing I will push back on in terms of Daniel and Duque, I suspect that they will be more creative than I think you think they will be. And it's only because of the time they have. I think that if Daly gets hurt against Oregon, or when did Kellen Wyatt go out for the season? Was it Michigan State? I think if Daly gets hurt against Maryland, then it's just Daniel and Duque's up next, because it's like we've got 6 days to prepare. We're not gonna upset the apple cart, whatever. I think given the best part of a month, I suspect Brian Haynes will have some stuff installed, and especially because he has some very experienced players in that defensive front. Like, it's not like they're doing this with only transfers. There's guys that have played their entire careers, second, third, fourth, fifth year players that have played their entire careers in that defensive front. I think he would trust that he can get creative and those guys can handle it. So I think we'll see plenty of Daniel and Ndukwe, but I just think I would not be shocked if we see a bunch of stuff that maybe we have not really seen because Haynes has the time.
But I still think that Ndukwe will be on the field for that. Like that.
Maybe I would not.
They've shown what
you were the one that mentioned the 3-down lineman stuff to me, or I think you might have mentioned it on our last podcast. I would not be surprised if we see some of that.
But again, usually it's based on what formations the offense runs. But I think what they've shown is usually when they've replaced somebody, and like you said, maybe the timing's different, but they just are not a team that sort of rotates guys, right? Like D'Angelo Pons misses a game, Gandy plays all the snaps, right? It's just that they've tended to, when an injury happens, the next man is up, and then they play the snaps, and then you scheme around it. But so I just think if you're asking me if they play 65 defensive snaps, how many does Ndukwe get? I think he gets 50 of those or something like that.
No, Pecan Pies here asked, speaking of $3.5 million, is it true that Drew Mestemaker is the quarterback at North Texas turned down $3.5 million? And then Hoop said some version of what I was going to say afterward, which is I would be careful. Those when numbers become public, like the vast majority of NIL and revenue sharing contracts are not public. Think about how few players where there is a publicly acknowledged number from somewhere, whether it's the player, the family, the agent, whatever, not just I heard he's on $1 million, or I heard he's on 2.3 or whatever. Those are very few and very far between.
Well, the two we have from Indiana are Barstool personality and a court case. So, it's that's it, right? That's the only two numbers we have confirmed.
So when you're seeing these numbers thrown around, remember that there's probably a reason someone is willing to put a number next to a name. And that someone is probably trying to use that number as leverage. And I would just be very wary in a world where, and believe me, we push to get more transparency in this, and we'll see if that, more of that develops as time goes on. But in a world that is still pretty opaque, in a market that is still pretty dark, I would be wary of moments when it seems like guys are suddenly willing to discuss how much money they have, right, and how much they're getting paid. So I can't tell you that Indiana offered this and this was accepted or this was turned down. I can only tell you that I become suspicious when I see somebody putting an actual number next to it, and that is why. We're going to kind of wrap here. We're not going to go crazy on the playoff and the Rose Bowl. There will be time for that, not least when we actually know who Indiana is going to play. But I did want to kind of close on this with maybe some longer-term roster questions. We don't have to go crazy on it. But I think that, the questions about quarterback and the quarterback market, and someone asked, is Alberto Mendoza the 2026 quarterback? I think it's worth at least just casting one eye into the portal conversation, because we know it is ongoing. Even as Indiana is preparing for the Rose Bowl, they have to be preparing as well for the portal. It's the window's gonna open early next year. I could sit here and give you probably, I would say, about 14, 15 they would need to add, but I'm curious if what are the positions that you think are going to command their most time and attention in the portal?
Well, I think one interesting thing, and I didn't get to follow up on it with Signetti. He mentioned we had 3 opportunities to talk to him. I think he mentioned this on the Zoom. The first Zoom he had when he was talking about the playoffs is that the first thing that they were going to try to do was have the conversation with the players about retention. And I'm assuming that meant locking everybody up to, a specific amount for next year, because to your point, they're going to be, in theory, when's the window? Is it the 2nd through the 9th-ish?
No, it's 2 weeks. Hold on, I'll get it. Keep talking.
But so, win or lose, they're going to have to be ready for the transfer portal opening and have to have sort of an idea of what their roster looks like. And so they're having January
2nd through 16th.
2nd through 16th. So if they win, which, I think there's a really good chance of that, they'll be in the midst of prep while they're kind of dealing with it. If they lose, they'll be coming right back home to the idea of it being open. And we've talked about how quickly those things move. And players are already obviously sort of putting their names out there that they're going in. So they're having those discussions now. So I'm assuming there will be players that are leaving that maybe don't publicly say it, but they know. Obviously, the coaching staff will know whether it's draft, transfer, or otherwise, what they're going to have they need to know for the second. In terms of what they need, I think, somebody mentioned Alberto. I think that's maybe the most intriguing discussion to have. I think both of you and I have had conversations with people that think very highly of him and think that his upside is pretty good. Obviously they had success with Fernando. He's been in the system for 2 years. They've wanted him. They've had him signed since he was at JMU in terms of the staff. So obviously they believe in him. So setting that off to the side, I think that's 1A. And
well, here, let me give you my. Can I give you just my raw total? I did a little list while we talked. One quarterback, and we can discuss at what level, but one quarterback, one running back. I forgot about Lee Beebe until someone reminded me about him yesterday. So I think one running back because you've got Beebe and Martin back. One wide receiver, presuming Omar Cooper does not go to the NFL. Someone mentioned the Surratt replacement. I think it's pretty clear the Surratt replacement is Charlie Becker. But I think you're going to want at least one more veteran receiver as you start to bring guys up through like a LeBron Bond or a Davion Chandler, someone like that. 2 tight ends, an offensive tackle, and a center. You could fill one of these spots in theory with somebody on roster that you shift positions. But then, for example, I think they call him Demola Ajani, I think is what his teammates nickname him as. If he's your long-term replacement at one of the tackle spots, then you might need somebody else at guard. Or if you shift Bray Lynch over to center, then you're going to need somebody else at guard. So right now, basically 2 offensive linemen. It's just a question of how you want those pieces to be arranged. And then on defense, I think probably 2 edge players, maybe 1 plus a tackle, 1 to 2 linebackers, a safety, a corner, a long snapper, and I put a question mark next to punter because I do wonder if at some point Quinn Warren is the guy back there. So that's 13, 14, 15 players total.
Yeah, that's probably 4, 5, 8, 10. Yeah, I think 15 players is probably the right number. I'm not sure, I agree with all the distribution there. I think there's some weird questions at wide receiver, is Tyler Morris done? Does he try to come back, run it back? I do think they need more veterans in that room, more than one, especially whether Cooper stays or not. I think there's some interesting questions, the secondary could be in really, really good shape. Everybody in theory could come back from that group. Pons is probably the biggest one to
other than Lewis Moore.
Right, other than Lewis Moore. But then outside of that, they still got guys with experience, or I guess the NC State kid would be out. But 3 out of the 5. And so
with your Byron Baldwins and your Jaja Boyd.
Knighton on the bench, you've got Andy on the bench. You kind of set that room up more for the future than you did anywhere else. I think linebacker, you're really, really in good shape. And then I think the biggest position behind quarterback for me is defensive line. Landino's probably the guy of the future, but who else is sort of in that mix? Tucker has eligibility left, obviously. But outside of that, you're really going to need help. So receiver, defensive line, and quarterback. But I think quarterback is obviously where sort of the discussion starts and ends. Somebody said Alberto has said he'll leave if he doesn't get a chance to start. I never have seen anything like that, to be honest. I think he'll want. I just think at a minimum he'll want a chance to compete for the starting job. But I don't think there's any reason he shouldn't have one, having been in the system 2 years, having gotten some experience. Obviously not necessarily a ton of meaningful snaps, but he played 4th quarter in 6 games. And so, there should be every reason he's at least allowed a chance to compete for the job. And Cignetti hasn't ever said, even with Mendoza, Fernando here never ruled out competition at the position. And so, but
it's worth pointing out, like his high school coach, their high school coach told me a story for that piece I wrote about them, that when Fernando left, Alberto was a rising junior. They had a kid with D1 offers transfer in from another district who was a senior. And basically Alberto just pretty quickly just beat him out. So, and listen, this is it's a fascinating conversation, a position like quarterback where you can only really have one, because if you do pursue like if we take those numbers as something approaching gospel, like 2 to 3 million is like a top line quarterback. Well, if you put 3 million in a quarterback and then he doesn't win the job, it's great for the competition, but is it great for the way that the money's being distributed throughout your roster? I don't know.
And is there now a discussion with like salary cap? Like, one of the things I find interesting, because I covered Cincinnati before for a year, just like the idea, it was right before Joe Burrow got his whole deal and skewed all their salary cap issues, right? Like, as you put more money into, like, would Alberto save them some money elsewhere if they have so much confidence in Alberto, and he's probably not yet on an NIL deal or revenue sharing deal that's as robust as sort of like your $3.5 million guy? What does that do for the rest of your roster? Right? Like, I mean, and like, are those
you can also, there are programs that have also like signed guys to I know this, have signed guys to multi-year deals and basically like said, we're going to give you, I don't know, 500 to keep you sweet this year, and then the plan is that you're the starter next year. I think Georgia Tech did this with Haynes King's backup, and then I think Haynes King's backup transferred to Florida with Buster Faulkner. But the point is, like, it is something that schools will do, where they'll say, like, we'll give you a multi-year deal. First year we'll pay you a little bit more, like a really well compensated backup, and then the second year we'll pay you like a starter. Indiana 10 says, will rev share affect next year's roster? Yes, rev share is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And that is where you kind of get into this conversation about, like, sort of the salary cap math of it all that you were talking about there.
If you have 50, if you need 15 guys, which is still a high number, can you afford to miss or afford a luxury of, like, if you think Alberto's good or at this level or can get to this level, does it make sense to spend, like, say 3 offensive linemen? Man, I can get 2 top tier offensive lineman guys instead of spreading it. It's just, now you have to have those discussions, and Cignetti's the guy, right? He's the GM, and so it's on him, because he said that these are the decisions he likes to make and wants to make. And so I think that the quarterback situation has sort of all these tenets that are fascinating to it, because of that. It adds to it just the math of it all, and as we see these numbers rise for quarterbacks, and their confidence in kind of their system and the way they develop guys, like, that adds into it. Like, do they feel like they can get Alberto there quicker than most staffs?
Because, like, to your point, like, they identified Alberto as somebody they wanted out of high school, and they brought Alberto with them from JMU. They did not bring the offensive player of the year with them. They, like, we all thought Jordan McLeod would just come over to Indiana. They did not bring their Sun Belt player of the year quarterback with them, but they did bring their quarterback. But that doesn't mean they think Alberto Mendoza is, going to be the best quarterback in Big Ten history. It just means, like, there is clearly something in him that they have liked for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I actually talked to Alberto the week he committed here, and it was essentially like the coaching staff was just making sure they were coming with Cignetti, and they told him to he had decommitted, and they just told him, like, stand down, like, just wait for a second, and we got you, like, you're coming with us. And so, like, yeah, I mean, to your point, like, they wanted this guy, and it would be strange kind of left turn to be like, well, we don't think he's the guy at all, just because I think they've invested him and they think highly of him. I mean, he was the backup this year, right? Like, they wouldn't have put him in a position to be one step away from the job if they didn't believe in him, if he was capable of it, at least this year. And so I just think it could define the rest of the offseason, like I said, because of the money, because of how you set up the offense, what the strengths are. And those are the discussions I think that they're having, obviously, kind of during this layoff before they find out the opponent. Like, if it's Alberto, or if it's another guy we target, what kind of receiver, because we saw them make changes to the offense from last year to this year. And I think that they kind of build the offense that way. And they've got obviously a lot of questions. You kind of talk about running back. I mean, we thought maybe the running backs would be sort of pass catching backs because that's what they recruited, but it wasn't. So it all kind of stems from there. And then I think we'll see. I think it'll be an interesting offseason.
This is where I point out that this is the first year in 7 that Indiana has made it through an entire regular season without having to start multiple quarterbacks, whether because of injury or because of personnel choices. The last time they did that was 2018 with Peyton Ramsey. Michael Penix spelled him at times before he got injured. But the point is, we can have this conversation about the big name in the playoff or the promising young quarterback on your roster. They need at least one, because history tells us that more often than not, your backup's going to have to start some games at some point. We just wanted to end this here. Someone asked a couple times about Tyler Cherry's status for next year. We don't really know much. The injury was obviously substantial enough that he knew he would take this year off. He is still with the team. I saw him on the field at the Big Ten Championship game. He's been a student assistant this season, but it's not really clear what his sort of long-term prognosis is, whether that has changed from where it was when he got injured a year ago, if he's going to be back in sort of football activity next semester, just kind of what's going on there. We just really don't know. It's not to be flippant about it, but there just haven't been a lot of reasons to ask, frankly, because there's just been so much else going on. So we'll wrap it there. We'll talk some basketball when we can reconvene next. Basketball will be hitting by the time we podcast again. It's sort of 2-week break around the holidays before getting geared back up for not quite 2 weeks, but close, getting geared back up for Big Ten play. But for now, for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman, Herald Times. He's Mike Niziolek, Tommy Norris enthusiast. This has been Mind Your Banners for December 17th, 2025. Remember to watch the latest episode of Landman on CBS and Paramount Plus, and we'll talk to you soon.